Hello, my name is Nerida Campbell and I'm the Acting Head of Curatorial at Sydney Living Museums. Welcome to today's Discover SLM talk, and I extend a particularly warm welcome to our members, donors and supporters. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land I live and currently work. I pay my respects to elders, past, present and future. Curators at SLM are constantly discovering new stories about the people, places and things we care for at our 12 sites. During this talk series, we've been sharing some of this research with you. And as we approach the end of the year, we move our focus to food and Christmas in the colonies. Join us every Tuesday at 4 till 4:30 to hear our curators delve into new topics. Today's speaker is Marina Grillink, who is the Assistant Curator at the Caroline Simpson Library and Research Collection and part of the curatorial team here at Sydney Living Museums. She has a special interest in the social and material history of New South Wales and Australia since European settlement, and her research has focused on both 2D and 3D holdings in the research collection. Marina's work encompasses research, interpretation, curation of displays, cataloguing and collection management. She also contributes to exhibitions, stories and histories for Sydney Living Museums. If you have any questions for Marina, add them to the Zoom chat and she will answer them at the end of the talk. Thanks, Marina.
Thanks, Nerida, and thank you all for joining us. I'm coming to you from the Blue Mountains of New South Wales, which is located within the country of the Darug and Gundungurra peoples. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. As Nerida mentioned, I'll be talking to you about 19th century domestic advice manuals from the Caroline Simpson Library and Research Collection. I should start by saying that advice manuals have actually been around for a very long time. European publications date as far back as the 1500s, and globally, works were continuing to be released into the 20th century. But it was the 19th century where we see a peak in both production and consumption, when the advice industry became a lucrative business for publishers, opened many doors for new authors, and achieved a widespread readership. In a moment, I'll share my screen and start giving you a brief overview of the genre of this genre of literature, as well as an overview of the project I've been working on and off over the past 2 years. I'll then review a few titles from the library's collection and put them into the context of the 19th century, as well as looking at some of the Australian experiences. So fingers crossed, I'll now share my screen. For those of you unfamiliar with the genre, this doesn't want to go forward. Just a moment, I'm going to just have to go back and do that again. There we go. So for those of you unfamiliar with the genre, advice manuals can be seen as the forerunners of the self-help books, home magazines and women's periodicals we know today. Manuals educated the reader, they offered guidance and instruction and provided essential consumer information. Works covered topics such as household management, domestic service, decorating and etiquette. And as you'll see, manuals were very prescriptive in nature and moral in tone. They promoted popular notions of taste and culture and maintained those of class, gender, duty and morality. Manuals catered to a middle-class desire for respectability. This essential element was a defining factor of the upper classes and therefore seen as key to self-improvement and social advancement. The genre and its growth alongside 19th century middle-class progression can now give us great insights into the shifting aesthetics and social and economic changes that occurred throughout the century. The Carolyn Simpson Library holds a comprehensive collection of 19th century domestic advice manuals. The majority of these were published in the UK, with some from the US and Australia. A number of the titles are now extremely rare, and in some cases, the library retains the only known copy in a public collection. In 2019, we decided to add advice manuals to our list of collection strengths. The library has been acquiring these volumes for many years, but no one had really focused on them as a collection. We needed to pull it all together to better understand the scope of the genre, if we were to make it more searchable and more accessible. Criteria for inclusion in the project was initially restricted to date range and rarity. The decision was taken not to include instructional manuals, such as needlework or cookery books, the idea that these could potentially be listed as collection strengths down the track. As a research resource, the Carolyn Simpson Library seeks to interpret collections, such as advice manuals, with a view to providing context and therefore greater insight into not only the historic houses managed by Sydney Living Museums, but more broadly, the social and material histories of New South Wales and Australia. So the following is a selection of manuals that were included in the project. In the fields of domestic economy, readership comprised chiefly of young married women. Manuals informed the housewife on a woman's role within the domestic sphere, how to be domestically capable, make a comfortable home and live within one's means. Manuals presented the kitchen as a suitable place for middle-class women to develop skills, and they promoted managerial proficiency as key to a woman's role as mistress of the house. Early manuals, like the 1815 Female Instructor, were aimed at literate young women from upper middle-class backgrounds. The writing is idealistic in nature and moral in tone, a format used in 18th century women's literature, which translated Christian values into household terms. While these works defined the traditional and distinguishing virtues of respectable women, they also began to promote their role as being beyond the ornamental. Practical economy differs from the majority of domestic economy manuals in that it's aimed at both mistresses and masters. This 1822 copy has provenance to English-born banker and pastoralist John Leake and demonstrates the existence of advice manuals in early Australia. Leake arrived in the colony of Hobart Town in 1823, accompanied by wife Elizabeth, family members, servants, 6 sheep, and the materials necessary to start building a home. Again, aimed at the upper middle classes, the book covers subjects such as location of land and position of dwelling, the natural and human resources required to establish a healthy, functioning, productive dwelling and estate, the human resources necessary to maintain a comfortable life, and the organisation and fit out of internal and external spaces. Leake was granted land on the Macquarie River near Campbelltown and developed Rosedale Estate. He was assigned convict labour for use as house servants, builders and farmhands, and built a large Italianate stone villa designed by colonial architect James Blackburn. Wives like Elizabeth Leake endured isolation and even hard work in Australia's early rural landscapes. Many were reluctant to allow assigned servants into their homes, and with free house servants difficult to recruit to remote areas prior to mid-century, training and development of domestic skills for these female settlers was crucial. By mid-century, a broader range of the middle classes were consuming advice manuals. Growth in employment opportunities beyond domestic service saw a rise in class fluidity and an increase in women becoming mistress of the house in their own homes. This 1860 edition of The Frugal Housewife was aimed at lower middle class women. It gives advice via anecdotal stories of failure, tales of extravagance, lack of virtue, and failure to monitor costs due to false pride or foolish ambition. Chapters include odd scraps for the economical, common cooking, and hints to persons of moderate fortune. American author Lydia Maria Francis Child was an abolitionist, women's rights activist, novelist, and journalist. She references experiences in Boston and speaks of the sacrifices made by the working classes for the benefit of the rich. Taking a strong position on the burden worn, particularly by disadvantaged women, the frugal housewife advocates religion and education as the primary means to create, as she puts it, wealth from toil, to raise living standards and end the disgrace of poverty. Guides for servants were designed for those learning to work and were written by authors from varied social classes, including ex-servants. They could be relevant to the functions of a specific role or cover the range of tasks performed by single servants of lower income households, such as a maid of all work. But many went beyond this. The Footman's Guide is written for young boys starting a new life in the house of an employer. The manual not only provides instruction on the correct performance of duties, it also includes information on topics such as servant hierarchies and offers social guidance and moral encouragement on fitting in with the rules and traditions of middle-class households. Guides could also cover the range of positions required to staff large households or estates. These could be retained by the household and used as reference books for servants as well as masters and mistresses. An example of this is the now extremely rare Hulston's Guide to Service and Guide to Trade series. The 34-volume combined series were first released in 1838 by publisher Charles Knight. A number of volumes from the series were reissued around 1849 by Hulston and Stoneman, and these include The Housemaid. The series are listed in an 1854 inventory of books from Elizabeth Farm in Parramatta, now managed by Sydney Living Museums. Wool pioneer John Macarthur and wife Elizabeth arrived in the colony of Port Jackson in 1790. Macarthur was granted 100 acres, or 40 hectares, on the river near the town of Parramatta and built a brick cottage in the late 18th century English vernacular style. Alterations and extensions formed the colonial-style homestead that still stands. It's possible that Macarthur ordered the industrial library for Elizabeth. Surviving volumes from the series are now part of the library at Camden Park House, the Macarthur's second property, designed by colonial architect John Verge in the Georgian Palladian style and built in 1835 on the Nepean River, where generations of Macarthur's descendants have since resided. Simple Rules was first published in 1834 for the girls educated in the Female School of Industry, established in Macquarie Street, Sydney in 1827. This 1839 edition is written in the style of catechisms, simple questions and answers that provide instruction on domestic duties and behaviour, as well as giving moral and religious education. The school and the book illustrate the endeavours being made in the colony to address the servant shortages that were being experienced at the time. The intention of the school was to produce female domestics, and girls aged from as young as 4 were trained there until the age of 12 or 14 before placement into service roles. With women expected to bring morality and respectability to colonial outposts, these girls were also envisaged to eventually become the virtuous wives and mothers so needed by the community. Simple Rules was written by Lady Eliza Darling, wife of New South Wales Governor Sir Ralph Darling and patron of the committee who founded the Female School of Industry. Women's charitable works were generally done through these ladies' committees, a practice that enabled upper-class women to not only replicate their British lifestyle while in the colonies, but allowed women like Eliza Darling to engage in life beyond the domestic sphere, as charitable activities such as education of the less fortunate posed no threat to their primary roles. The book is a good example of female authorship in the advice genre and offers insight into the development of women's participation in the print media generally, albeit the preserve of the wealthy at this stage. Female authors had generally released works either anonymously, under the guise of men, or under pseudonyms such as By a Lady or By the Countess of. But by using their position in society, women such as Eliza Darling gave respectability to the act of writing for public consumption. And over the course of the century, authorship became an acceptable way for women to earn a living. Indeed, as mentioned earlier, women such as Lydia Child went on to use the print media as a platform to be involved in and promote many social and political causes. Similar developments can be seen in the field of home furnishing. Advice on home decorating had traditionally been written by men for men. In the first half of the century, authors such as Thomas Hope had been the go-to guys for advice on tasteful home decorating among fashionable circles. But by late century, philosophical changes had given women control of the domestic interior, and this was accompanied by a growth in both female readership and authorship. The Drawing Room was released in 1877 and written by craftswoman Mrs. Oren Smith. It was the third book in the 12-volume Art at Home series, published as a collectible set between 1876 and 1883, which covered a range of subjects. The 4 volumes dedicated to interior decoration were authored by women, and their inclusion in the Art at Home series demonstrates the development of women as professional designers and decorators. The intention of these works was to offer guidance and instruction via the professional and personal experience of the authors to a lower middle-class readership who lived without servants and could not afford skilled decorators. Through the 1860s, the then unmarried Lucy Faulkner produced embroideries for the furnishings and decorative arts manufacturing and retail firm of Morris, Marshall, Faulkner and Company, founded in 1861 by William Morris and associates from the pre-Raphaelite movement. Through the 1870s, as Mrs. Oren Smith, Lucy continued to design, make and exhibit works through the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society. Some of the smallest volumes in the collection are etiquette volumes, etiquette manuals. These pocket-sized books cover topics from letter writing to ballroom dancing and finding a suitable spouse. First published in 1851, Seaton's Ballroom Manual catered to a growing demand for easy-to-follow instructions to fashionable dancers. This 1855 edition describes well-known quadrilles and couples dances and includes the figures to be performed. But the work also provides vital information on topics such as how and when invitations to balls are created and issued, to whom they are sent and how they should be responded to. Seaton also prepared the middle-class readers for the ballroom setting, the polite behaviour expected of ladies and gentlemen, decorum, deportment, appropriate dress and conversation. The Cabinet Secretary was published in Calcutta in 1820. Now extremely rare, this manual was translated from French, possibly the 17th century Le Secrétaire du Cabinet by Jean Puget de la Serre. If so, it demonstrates a long tradition of letter writing and the continued importance of old sources for the genre. Aimed at literate men and women from the upper middle classes, it assists writers in grammar and etiquette via example letters or templates, which cover a range of familiar, formal and business situations. This well-worn copy comes from the Historic House collection of Throsby Park, originally built for English-born Dr. Charles Throsby and wife Jane in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. The couple emigrated in 1802, and on Throsby's death in 1828, nephew Charles Throsby Jr. inherited his uncle's estates. Throsby Park was transferred to Sydney Living Museums from the National Parks and Wildlife Service in 2010. While we don't know how this volume was acquired, there were close links between New South Wales and Calcutta at the time. Throsby Jr.'s cousin, Charles Throsby Smith, visited Throsby Park in 1816 before going to Calcutta and returning to Sydney in 1819. And finally, while most manuals were written as serious instructional books, sometimes taking themselves a little too seriously, others took the form of satirical exposés of high society. The Book of Fashion was written by one of the exclusives, no less, and follows a format of British satirical literature found in early 19th century publications. Through an expose of folly and vice, the reader is advised on how to deal with the various types of aristocrats found in fashionable circles. It also provides definition to commonly used terms, and French terms such as ton, referring to manners or style, used in Britain's 1830s beau monde set. The fashion influencer whose axioms are parodied here was George Brian Beau Brummell, a leading exponent of men's dress design in the Regency period. Brummell came to be known as the consummate dandy, and a genre of literature based on his manner emerged. However, Brummell became an object of ridicule on his later demise and came to symbolise the ridiculous. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Manuals that we've started to put up on the website can be found here, and keep watching this space because we're adding more and more all the time. And I'll now hand you back to Nerida.
Thanks, Marina. If anybody's got any questions for Marina, feel free to add them to the chat. Actually, we've just got one here from Anna. Were these manuals expensive and advertised widely?
They were advertised widely. The expense, I think, varied really a lot. I think a lot of the early manuals were actually quite expensive, and they were really geared more to an upper middle class readership. So you're going to find that most people other than the fairly wealthy probably wouldn't either be literate at that stage and certainly wouldn't be able to afford them. But as the century progressed, a lot of them ended up becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And we do have some that actually have, the price advertised in them. So it became much more accessible as time went on. Most certainly they became cheaper. In terms of advertising, they were advertised really widely, even from very early on in newspapers and journals that were able to be found right around the empire. And certainly in the United States, all of their newspapers and journals were advertising various things as well. Publishers would often have a lot of their own magazines that they would publish their own works in. And so you'd often find that not just in the newspapers, but also in other publications, you'd find them advertised.
Thank you. Hayley has asked, she said, you spoke about the Australian experience through some of the titles. Can you elaborate on any Australian publications?
Yes, we have a number of Australian publications in the collection. They weren't included in stage one of this project simply because they didn't meet the criteria of rarity. There's actually quite a few libraries around Australia that have holdings, but I'm working on them at the moment as a separate group. And interestingly, we've got a nice little selection that go right up into the 1940s. And they cover similar sort of topics, quite a few on etiquette, others on cookery, and others on domestic economy. But what I found interesting when I was looking into them was that it seems, as far as I know so far, most of them don't seem to appear until at least the 1870s or 1880s. And then there are a number that start to be published. And I suppose it's probably because, like a lot of things, we've already got a ready-made market here, but there's also a ready-made production already happening. And it's interesting when you start to read them. In terms of etiquette and a lot of domestic economy, they seem to still very much follow the British and American protocols of what is considered polite behaviour, or how you should treat your servants, or what you should expect from them, or how you should behave in the home, or how you should dress. And it's not until later in the century that we start seeing manuals being produced that are really more relevant to the Australian experience. And interestingly, particularly with some of the etiquette manuals, there's a huge focus on sport and the etiquette of playing sport, kangaroo hunting and swimming and cricket and all the sort of outdoor sports that some of the volumes are really heavily leaning towards the sports side of things and the etiquette that should be followed when you're playing sport. So obviously, I think even at that stage, we were obviously saw ourselves as very much a sporting country, a sporting community.
Oh, how fascinating. The etiquette of kangaroo hunting is one that I'd like to find out more about.
That's right.
Glenda's got a query here. She says, I presume the employer would supply the manual to their staff and maybe a lot of the staff were unable to read? She questions.
Yes, that's really interesting, isn't it? I think particularly early on, and probably that's exactly right. And I think that's why a lot of them are in a very, very simple format. But you do find by mid-century, there must be an increasing literacy rate. And possibly that might be part of your domestic service training. A lot of children ended up in these schools of industry, particularly from poorer backgrounds. They were generally done by charitable works. The one that I mentioned that was here in Sydney, started by Eliza Darling and that ladies' committee, that followed a British format that was established and put in place through a lot of different counties throughout England, and often focusing on very poor areas where there were either going to be orphans or the children of coal miners and other poor people who would put their children into these schools of industry where evidently they would get educated and they would become literate, and they would, often these manuals would be published in conjunction or for the school. And so it would be almost be used as the school text. Which is certainly what Simple Rules by Eliza Darling was. It was really the text that was used for the school. So they would have been taught to read as well.
And I assume with the example you spoke about from the Cabinet Secretary from Throsby House, the fact it's so well thumbed, was it shared around?
Well, we don't know, but it certainly looks like it, doesn't it? It looks like they've either used it over generations or somebody got hold of it at one stage and decided to practice their art. I'm not really sure. It could be a little bit of both.
Fantastic piece of graffiti there. Barbara was wondering, is there much about the etiquette for theatre and concerts in the manuals that you've looked at, Marina?
Yeah, there certainly is, in terms of what you should wear and how you should act at intermission, beforehand, afterwards, going to parties or drinks that might occur that are alongside theatres and things like that. Yes, definitely. And very, very prescriptive. In fact, a lot of them, really do take themselves incredibly seriously, and they're really instructing you on what you should wear according to your age, your complexion, your hair colour, your body weight, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Was there a piece of advice that you found particularly surprising in all of the research that you've done?
Not surprising. I suppose you understand very, very quickly how prescriptive it is. I think what sort of shocked me a little bit was some of the advice manuals written for servants. And I guess it shouldn't be that shocking when we know about the history, but many of the advice manuals written for servants are really enforcing their place as laid down by God almost. The tone is really written in such a way that this is what you were born into, and so that you should accept it. And it's your place in the world. And I suppose that really continued on right through the century. Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of things change over the century, particularly, I think, as I touched on, for women. There's a couple of arguments within the domestic advice manual forum where people argue that it's an incredibly repressive thing, and it certainly is for class and gender. But then there's another argument, and there are PhDs being written about the opportunities that present themselves for not only for servants but also for women to become writers. A lot of ex-servants find themselves in a position where they can actually get out of domestic service once they're older and earn a living writing domestic advice manuals.
Wonderful. Well, Marina, we're out of time for today's session. Thank you so much. It was such a fascinating area to dip into. And for the audience, join us next Tuesday at 4 o'clock for a talk on the ghost kitchen at Elizabeth Bay House with Dr. Jackie Muirleen. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you.